The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Leavenworth, Kansas, as Rachel Mason clutched her swaddled newborn twins to her chest, tears streaming down her dirt-smudged face. She had nowhere to go. Her own father had thrown her out just hours before, declaring no daughter of his would bring such shame upon their family by bearing children without a husband. It was 1878, and Rachel had just turned 22. Until 3 days ago, she'd lived in her family home on the edge of town, where her father, a stern banker with an iron grip on both his money and his reputation, had kept her hidden away during her pregnancy. Her mother had died 5 years earlier, leaving Rachel alone with a father whose disappointment in her had grown like a poison after she'd been abandoned by the traveling salesman who'd promised marriage before disappearing forever. The twins, a boy and a girl, had arrived early, squalling their way into the world with the help of the midwife who'd been paid handsomely to keep quiet. But now, with the babies born and healthy, her father had given her $50 and told her never to darken his doorstep again. "You've made your bed," he had said coldly, not even looking at his grandchildren. "Now you must lie in it elsewhere." Rachel stumbled along the outskirts of town, trying to quiet her hungry babies while avoiding the judging stares of townsfolk. Her arms ached from holding them, and her body still throbbed with the pain of childbirth. She had no plan beyond getting through the night, finding somewhere to rest before figuring out how to feed and care for her children alone. As the last rays of sunlight faded and a cool spring breeze picked up, Rachel spotted a small barn at the edge of a modest property just outside town. With no other options, she slipped inside, finding comfort in the warmth of hay and the soft nickering of a single horse. She settled into a corner, arranging her shawl as a makeshift bed for the twins, trying not to let despair overwhelm her. "Hush now, my darlings," she whispered, tears flowing freely. "Mama's here. We'll figure this out together." She must have dozed off, for the next thing she knew, a lantern was illuminating the barn and a tall figure stood in the doorway. "Who's there?" a deep voice called out. "Show yourself before I fetch my rifle," Rachel gasped, pulling her babies closer. "Please," she said, her voice breaking. "We mean no harm. We just needed shelter for the night. We'll be gone by morning." The lantern moved closer, and she could make out the silhouette of a man, broad-shouldered and wearing a wide-brimmed hat. As he approached, his features became clearer. A strong jawline shadowed with stubble, piercing eyes that reflected the lantern's glow, and a look of surprise that quickly softened to concern. "Madam," he said, lowering the lantern to get a better look, "you've got babies with you." One of the twins began to cry, answering his question. The man crouched down, setting the lantern on the ground. In the improved light, Rachel could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps late 20s, with sun-bronzed skin and kind eyes that didn't match his rough exterior. "I'm Thomas Cooper," he said. "This is my property." "I'm so sorry," Rachel whispered, struggling to stand. "We'll leave right away." Thomas shook his head, holding up a hand. "Stay put, madam. You and those little ones don't look in any condition to be wandering in the dark." He glanced at the babies, then back to Rachel's pale face. "When's the last time you ate?" The simple question broke something in Rachel. She tried to answer but could only manage a choked sob. Thomas nodded as if he understood everything. "I've got a cabin just up the hill with a warm fire and food. You're welcome to it." Rachel hesitated, years of warnings about strangers, especially men, echoing in her mind. But the twins were hungry, and she was exhausted and desperate. "Why would you help us?" she asked. Thomas's expression turned solemn. "Because my own mama was once in a similar position and someone helped her. I wouldn't be here otherwise." He stood, offering his hand. "I promise you'll be safe. The cabin has 2 rooms. You can have the bedroom with a lock on the door if it makes you feel better." Rachel looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of deception. Finding none, she gathered her courage and her babies. "I'm Rachel," she said. "Rachel Mason, and these are—" She paused, realizing she hadn't even named her children yet, so focused had she been on survival. "These are my twins." Thomas smiled gently. "Well, Rachel Mason, let's get you and those little ones up to the house before they catch cold." He reached down, carefully taking one of the babies from her arms. "I may not know much about infants, but I can carry one while you manage the other. That fair?" Rachel nodded, too tired to argue. As they walked the short distance to the cabin, she noticed how carefully Thomas held her son, how he shielded the tiny bundle from the night breeze with his broad chest. The cabin was small but tidy, with a main room containing a table, chairs, and a wood stove where a pot of stew simmered. A narrow hallway led to what she assumed were the bedrooms Thomas had mentioned. "Sit," he instructed, gesturing to a chair pulled close to the stove. "I'll warm some milk for the little ones if you think they can take it." "They are only 3 days old," Rachel said. "They need—" She flushed, embarrassed. "Ah," Thomas said, understanding dawning. "Of course. You feed them and I'll fix you something to eat. You look like you could use a good meal yourself." He turned away, giving her privacy as he busied himself with ladling stew into a bowl. Rachel adjusted her clothing and put the first twin to her breast, marveling at the strange turn her day had taken. "I was thrown out today," she found herself saying. "My father, he couldn't bear the shame of an unwed daughter with children." Thomas kept his back turned, respecting her modesty. "Some men have peculiar ideas about shame," he said. "Never made sense to me how tiny babies could be something shameful." When Rachel had fed both twins, Thomas set the bowl of stew before her, along with a chunk of bread. "Eat," he said simply. "Then we'll sort out sleeping arrangements." Rachel ate ravenously, suddenly aware of her bone-deep hunger. Thomas sat across from her, drinking coffee and occasionally glancing at the twins, who now slept peacefully bundled together in her shawl on her lap. "Do they have names?" he asked after a comfortable silence. Rachel looked down at her children. "Not yet. Everything happened so fast." "Well, there's time for naming," Thomas said. "No need to rush." When she'd finished eating, he showed her to the bedroom, a simple space with a clean bed, a small table, and a window overlooking the property. "This is yours for as long as you need it," he said, standing in the doorway. "There's water in the pitcher for washing, and I'll be just down the hall if you need anything." Rachel stared at him, bewildered by his kindness. "Mr. Cooper, Thomas," he corrected. "Thomas," she amended. "Why are you doing this? You don't know me." He leaned against the doorframe, considering her question. "I know enough," he said finally. "I know you're a mother protecting her children. I know you've been dealt a hard hand, and I know I've got space and means to help." He smiled slightly. "Besides, I could use the company. Gets lonely out here with just the horses and cattle." With that, he bid her good night, closing the door behind him. Rachel settled the twins on the bed, creating a barrier of pillows to keep them safe, then lay down beside them. For the first time in months, she fell asleep without fear gnawing at her heart. Morning came with the sound of movement in the cabin and the smell of coffee brewing. Rachel quickly tended to the twins, who were miraculously still sleeping after their night feedings, and ventured out to the main room. Thomas was at the stove, frying eggs and bacon. He turned when he heard her, offering a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Good morning," he said. "Thought you might sleep longer. Those little ones must be keeping you busy." "They were surprisingly good last night," Rachel admitted, taking a seat at the table. Thomas set a plate before her. "Eat while it's hot. I've got chores to tend to, but I'll be back midday." He hesitated. Unless you're planning to move on, the question hung in the air. Rachel looked down at her plate, then back to Thomas's expectant face. I don't have anywhere to go, she confessed, but I can't impose on your kindness indefinitely. Thomas poured her coffee. It's no imposition. Like I said, the company's welcome. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I've got work that needs doing around here, and once you're recovered, maybe we could come to an arrangement. You help with cooking and keeping house, and you and the little ones have a place to stay. Rachel studied him, trying to discern his true motives. That's all you want, cooking and cleaning. His expression turned serious. That's all. I'm offering shelter and safety, Miss Mason, nothing more, nothing less. Something in his earnest gaze convinced her. Rachel nodded slowly. Then we accept, at least for now. And please call me Rachel. Thomas smiled, placing his hat on his head as he prepared to leave. Welcome to the Cooper Ranch, Rachel. It ain't much, but it's home. After he left, Rachel explored the cabin, finding it simple but well-maintained. There was evidence of a woman's touch in some of the details: curtains at the windows, a quilt on Thomas's bed, making her wonder about his past. Had there been a wife? Was he widowed? When the twins woke hungry, she sat in the rocking chair by the window, nursing them while watching Thomas work in the corral with a young horse. He moved with confident grace, his actions gentle but firm as he guided the animal. By the time he returned for the midday meal, Rachel had managed to prepare a simple lunch from the supplies in his pantry. She'd also decided on names for her children. Lily and Liam, she told him as they ate. They were my grandparents' names. Thomas nodded approvingly. Good, strong names. Over the next 2 weeks, they settled into an unexpected rhythm. Rachel recovered her strength and began taking on household duties while Thomas worked the small ranch. He was, she learned, a horse trainer by trade, buying young or troubled horses, gentling them, and selling them for a profit. He wasn't wealthy, but he made enough to live comfortably. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch if weather permitted, or by the fire if it didn't, and talk. Thomas told her about growing up the son of a single mother who had worked as a laundress in St. Louis before moving west for a fresh start. Rachel shared stories of her own mother, a gentle woman who had taught her to read and appreciate beauty in small things. She carefully avoided the topic of the twins' father, and Thomas never asked, though sometimes she caught him looking at the babies with a thoughtful expression. One evening, as a spring storm rolled across the prairie, Thomas returned from town with supplies and an unexpected gift: a wooden cradle large enough for both twins. Found it at the mercantile, he explained as he carried it in, shaking rain from his hat. Previous owner's twins are grown now. Thought it might be easier than keeping them on the bed. Rachel ran her hand over the smooth wood, touched beyond words. Thomas, you shouldn't have. He shrugged off her thanks, but his eyes warmed at her pleasure. It's practical. Besides, those two deserve a proper place to sleep. That night, after settling the twins in their new cradle, Rachel sat across from Thomas at the table, working up her courage to ask the question that had been nagging at her. Doesn't it bother you? She finally asked. What people must think, me living here with my children and no husband. Thomas looked up from the bridle he was mending. I don't much care what people think, but they must talk, especially when you go into town. He set down his work, giving her his full attention. Some do, he admitted. Mrs. Holloway at the general store asked if I'd taken up with that poor Mason girl and her illegitimate babies. He smiled slightly at Rachel's mortified expression. I told her you were my cousin, recently widowed, staying until you got back on your feet. Rachel blinked in surprise. You lied for me. I simplified things, he corrected. What happens under my roof is my business, not the town's. Besides, It's not so far from truth you are staying until you get back on your feet. The implication that she would eventually leave hung between them. Rachel looked down at her hands. "And if I wanted to stay longer?" she asked softly. Thomas was quiet for so long that she regretted her boldness. Then he said, "I'd like that, Rachel. Very much." Their eyes met across the table and something shifted in the air between them. The moment was broken by Lily's cry from the cradle. Rachel rose quickly, grateful for the distraction from the sudden tension. As spring turned to summer, life at the Cooper Ranch fell into a pleasant routine. Rachel's cooking improved. Thomas had been surviving on basic fare before her arrival, and she took pride in keeping the cabin clean and orderly. The twins grew stronger daily, their personalities emerging. Lily observant and serious, Liam more boisterous and quick to smile. Thomas proved to be a natural with the babies, unafraid to hold them or walk the floor with a fussy Liam when Rachel was exhausted. On warm evenings, he would carry them outside to show them the stars, his deep voice naming constellations as the infants gazed up with wide, uncomprehending eyes. Rachel found herself watching these moments, her heart softening toward this quiet man who had opened his home and heart to strangers in need. One sweltering July afternoon, as Rachel hung laundry while the twins napped inside, Thomas rode up on his gelding, leading another horse, a gentle-looking bay mare. "Thought you might like to learn to ride," he called as he dismounted. "Can't have you stuck at the cabin all the time." Rachel eyed the mare dubiously. "I've never been on a horse," Thomas grinned. "No time like the present. This is Daisy. She's as gentle as they come, perfect for a beginner." Despite her reservations, Rachel found herself agreeing to a lesson. Thomas helped her mount, his hands strong and steady at her waist, lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary. He showed her how to hold the reins, how to use her legs to guide the horse, his patient instruction boosting her confidence. They rode together slowly around the property, Rachel gradually relaxing into the rhythm of the horse's movement. When they returned to the cabin, her face was flushed with excitement. "That was wonderful," she exclaimed as Thomas helped her down, his hands spanning her waist easily. Their faces were close as her feet touched ground, and for a breathless moment Rachel thought he might kiss her. Instead, he stepped back, clearing his throat. "You're a natural," he said, leading the horses away to the barn. Rachel watched him go, confused by her disappointment. That night, after the twins were asleep, she joined Thomas on the porch. The summer night was alive with the sounds of crickets and the occasional distant howl of a coyote. "Thank you for today," she said, settling into the chair beside his. "I haven't felt that free in, well, maybe ever." Thomas smiled into the darkness. "Freedom's important. My mama used to say it was worth more than gold." "She sounds wise." "She was," he said simply. Rachel hesitated. "You don't talk about her much. Not much to say that doesn't end sad. She died when I was 16. Influenza." "I'm sorry," Rachel said softly. "My mother died when I was 17. Consumption." Thomas nodded, understanding in his silence. After a moment he spoke again. "I've been thinking about expanding the house, adding another bedroom now that the little ones are growing." Rachel turned to him, surprised. "You do that? For us?" "Who else?" he replied. "Unless you're still planning to leave someday." The question was casual, but Rachel sensed its importance. "I've thought about it less and less," she admitted. "This feels like home now." In the dim light from the cabin windows, she saw Thomas smile. "Good," he said. "That's good." The following week brought unexpected trouble. Rachel was in town for the first time since arriving at Thomas's ranch, having finally worked up the courage to face Leavenworth's residents. Thomas had business at the bank, and Rachel needed supplies that couldn't wait. With the twins secured in a clever carrying sling Thomas had fashioned, Rachel entered Holloway's general store, her chin held high despite her racing heart. Mrs. Holloway, a plump woman with sharp eyes, watched Rachel's approach with undisguised curiosity. "Well, if it isn't Miss Mason," she said, emphasizing the miss with subtle disapproval. "I see your little ones are thriving." "They are, thank you," Rachel replied politely, handing over her list of needed items. As Mrs. Holloway gathered the supplies, the bell above the door jingled, and Rachel tensed as her father walked in. Harold Mason stopped short at the sight of his daughter, his face hardening. "Father," Rachel acknowledged, her voice steady despite her churning stomach. Harold looked pointedly at the twins, then away, addressing Mrs. Holloway as if Rachel weren't there. "I'll come back later, Martha." "No need to leave on my account," Rachel said, finding courage in her anger. "We're just finishing our shopping." Her father turned cold eyes to her. "I see you found someone to take you in. Cooper always was soft-headed." "Thomas is a good man," Rachel replied, "more of a Christian than some who claim to be." Harold's face flushed. "You dare speak to me of Christian values? After disgracing our family name?" Mrs. Holloway was openly eavesdropping now, and other customers had paused their shopping to watch. "The only disgrace," Rachel said quietly, "was turning your back on your own blood." "You made your choice," Harold snapped. "And you made yours," Rachel countered. She gathered her purchases, leaving coins on the counter. "Good day, Mrs. Holloway." She walked past her father with her head high, but outside the store her composure crumbled. Tears threatened as she hurried down the street, nearly colliding with Thomas as he rounded the corner. "Rachel," he said, alarmed by her expression. "What happened?" Before she could answer, Harold Mason emerged from the store. He spotted them together and scowled. "So it's true," he called. "You've taken in my wayward daughter and her bastards." Thomas stiffened, his expression darkening. Gently, he moved Rachel behind him, facing her father. "Mr. Mason," he said, his voice deceptively calm, "I suggest you choose your next words carefully." Harold looked Thomas up and down contemptuously. "I always knew you were the town fool, Cooper, but taking on another man's cast-offs is a new low." Thomas moved so quickly Rachel barely saw it. One moment he was beside her, the next he had Harold by the collar, backed against the storefront. "Listen carefully," Thomas said, his voice low but clear enough for Rachel to hear. "Your daughter and her children are under my protection now. You gave up any right to comment on their lives when you threw them out." He released Harold with a slight push. "Now I suggest you go about your business and leave Rachel be." Harold straightened his jacket, face mottled with rage. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "Both of you." As her father stormed off, Rachel touched Thomas's arm. "We should go," she whispered, acutely aware of the staring townsfolk. Thomas nodded, taking the packages from her and leading her to where their wagon waited. He helped her up, then climbed beside her, his jaw still tight with anger. They rode in silence until they were well outside town. Finally, Thomas spoke. "I'm sorry about that," he said. "I shouldn't have lost my temper." Rachel shook her head. "No, I'm grateful. No one's ever stood up for me like that." Thomas glanced at her, his expression softening. "You deserve better than what he gave you, Rachel, you and these little ones." He nodded toward the twins, who had remarkably slept through the entire confrontation. "What did he mean, 'we'll regret it'?" Rachel asked. Thomas's hands tightened on the reins. "Nothing he can back up. Your father may be influential in town, but he can't touch us at the ranch." But Harold Mason proved more vindictive than Thomas anticipated. 2 days later, a rider from town brought news that the bank was calling in the loan on Thomas's property, demanding full payment within 30 days. "This is my father's doing," Rachel said as Thomas read the letter, his expression grim. "He sits on the bank's board of directors. "It doesn't matter why," Thomas replied, folding the letter. "What matters is finding a way to pay." "How much?" Rachel asked. $500. Rachel gasped. It was an enormous sum. "Do you have it?" Thomas ran a hand through his hair. "Not readily. I've got 3 horses nearly ready to sell, but they won't bring more than 200 combined. I've got some savings, maybe another 100. "That still leaves 200 short," Rachel said, her heart sinking. "This is my fault. If I hadn't come here—" "Stop," Thomas said firmly. "This isn't your fault, and I don't regret taking you in, not for a second." He managed a smile. "We'll figure something out." But as days passed, solutions remained elusive. Thomas worked from dawn to dusk, training horses at a punishing pace while Rachel economized ruthlessly, saving every penny. One evening, as they sat at the table calculating figures that refused to add up, Rachel made a decision. "I'll go to my father," she said. "I'll beg him to reconsider." Thomas looked up sharply. "Absolutely not. What choice do we have? We're still short and time is running out. Rachel, that man threw you out when you needed him most. I won't let you humble yourself to him now." "But it's the only way." "No," Thomas interrupted, his voice gentler. "There is another way." Rachel waited, watching as he seemed to gather his courage. "Marry me," he said. She stared, certain she had misheard. "What?" Thomas reached across the table, taking her hand. "Marry me, Rachel. I've been thinking about it for weeks now. I was just waiting for the right time, but maybe there isn't one." "You want to marry me because of the loan?" Rachel asked, trying to make sense of his proposal. "No," Thomas said firmly. "I want to marry you because I love you. Because I love Lily and Liam as if they were my own. The loan is just pushing me to say what I've been feeling." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "Thomas, you don't have to answer now," he said quickly. "I know it's sudden. But I need you to know that whatever happens with the ranch, my feelings for you won't change." Rachel looked at their joined hands, then up into Thomas's earnest face. In the months they'd lived together, he had shown her nothing but kindness, respect, and increasingly, affection. She'd come to rely on his steady presence, to look forward to their quiet evenings together, to value his gentle way with her children. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes," Thomas repeated, looking stunned. Rachel smiled through her tears. "Yes, I'll marry you, not because of the loan, but because I love you too." Thomas's face broke into a smile of such radiant joy that Rachel's heart swelled. He stood, pulling her up with him, and took her in his arms. "I promise you won't regret this," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know," Rachel replied, and when he bent to kiss her, she rose on tiptoe to meet him. Their wedding took place 3 days later, a simple ceremony performed by the circuit preacher who happened to be passing through. Thomas's friend Jacob served as witness, along with his wife Sarah, who had taken an immediate liking to Rachel. That night, after the twins were asleep, Rachel joined Thomas in what was now their bedroom, shy but certain. His tenderness as they came together as husband and wife confirmed what her heart already knew: she had found a true partner, a man who cherished her for exactly who she was. The loan problem, however, remained. Even combined, their resources fell short of the required amount. Thomas had sold his best horses, and Rachel had contributed the money her father had given her when he cast her out, but they were still lacking. A week before the deadline, an unexpected visitor arrived at the ranch. Rachel was hanging laundry when she spotted the rider approaching, a distinguished-looking man on an expensive horse. Thomas emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "Can I help you, sir?" he called as the rider dismounted. "Thomas Cooper. I'm Edward Blackfield from the First National Bank in Kansas City." The man removed his hat, revealing silver-streaked dark hair. "I understand you have a situation with Leavenworth Savings and Loan." Thomas glanced at Rachel, then back to their visitor. "That's right. What's your interest in it?" "I've been looking to open a branch in this area, and I'm particularly interested in outstanding loans held by your local bank." Blackfield smiled thinly. "I've purchased several, including yours." Rachel moved to Thomas's side, her heart racing. "What does that mean for us?" Blackfield considered them both. "It means, Mrs. Cooper, that I now hold your note, and I'm prepared to offer more favorable terms than your previous lender." "Why would you do that?" Thomas asked suspiciously. "Business, Mr. Cooper, simply business. I find it more profitable to work with borrowers than to foreclose." He reached into his jacket, producing papers. "I'm prepared to extend your loan 5 years at a reduced interest rate. The monthly payment would be considerably less burdensome." Thomas took the documents, scanning them carefully. "There's got to be a catch," Blackfield chuckled. "The catch, as you put it, is that I believe this area is growing. Property values will rise. It's in my interest to have successful, stable borrowers rather than foreclosed properties to manage from afar." As Thomas continued examining the papers, Rachel observed Mr. Blackfield. There was something familiar about him, though she was certain they'd never met. After discussing the details, Thomas agreed to the new terms, signing where indicated. Blackfield tucked the papers away, seeming pleased with the transaction. As he prepared to leave, he paused, looking at Rachel. "Mrs. Cooper, if I might ask your maiden name?" "Mason," she replied, puzzled. Recognition flickered in Blackfield's eyes. "Harold Mason's daughter." Rachel nodded warily. "I see," Blackfield said, a strange smile crossing his face. "Well, this has been a most satisfactory visit." He tipped his hat to them both. "Good day to you." As they watched him ride away, Rachel frowned. "That was odd. Do you think he knows my father?" Thomas shrugged. "Banking circles are small, but I'm not looking this gift horse in the mouth. With these terms, we can manage the payments easily." Only later would they learn the truth. Edward Blackfield had indeed known Harold Mason. They had been rivals in business and love 30 years earlier. Blackfield had lost the woman they both courted to Mason, a defeat he had never forgotten. The opportunity to thwart his old rival's vindictive scheme had been too satisfying to resist, but that revelation was still in the future. For now, Thomas and Rachel celebrated their reprieve, grateful for the chance to build their life together without the immediate threat of losing their home. As summer faded into autumn, the Cooper household settled into happy domesticity. The twins began sitting up, their personalities blossoming. Thomas doted on them shamelessly, spending evenings on the floor playing with them while Rachel watched, her heart full. One crisp October morning, as they shared breakfast, Thomas broached a subject that had been on his mind. "I've been thinking," he said, watching Rachel feed Lily mashed apples. "The twins should have my name." Rachel looked up, surprised. "You want to adopt them, if you're agreeable. They're my children in every way that matters. I'd like it to be official." Rachel's eyes welled with tears. "Thomas, are you sure? Once it's done, there's no going back." "The world will see them as yours." "The world can see what I already know," he replied simply. "Lily and Liam are my children, regardless of blood." The adoption was formalized before the first snow fell. Judge Peterson, a fair-minded man who had no love for Harold Mason's high-handed ways, processed the paperwork with unusual speed. Lily and Liam Cooper entered their first winter secure in their father's name and love. Christmas that year was modest but joyful. Thomas carved wooden horses for the twins, while Rachel knitted him a warm scarf and baked his favorite apple pie. They invited Jacob and Sarah for Christmas dinner, the small cabin filled with laughter and goodwill. As they prepared for bed that night, Thomas presented Rachel with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" she asked, surprised. "Open it and see," he urged. Inside was a delicate silver locket. When she opened it, she found tiny portraits of the twins on one side and Thomas on the other, miniatures he had commissioned from a traveling artist months earlier. "Thomas," she breathed, touching the images reverently. "It's beautiful." "I wanted you to have something to keep us close to your heart," he said, helping her fasten it around her neck. "Though I hope we're already there." "You know you are," Rachel whispered, kissing him softly. Winter passed in cozy contentment, and when spring arrived, it brought new beginnings. The twins took their first tottering steps across the cabin floor, falling into Thomas's waiting arms with squeals of delight. The ranch prospered as Thomas's reputation as a horse trainer grew, bringing buyers from as far as St. Louis. And Rachel discovered she was expecting another child, conceived in love with the man who had saved them all. "Are you happy?" Thomas asked when she told him, his eyes searching her face for any sign of distress. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," she assured him, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "This child will be born into love from the very beginning." The town's attitudes had softened over time. Though Harold Mason maintained his cold distance, others in Leavenworth had warmed to the Cooper family. Mrs. Holloway now greeted Rachel warmly when she shopped, often slipping candy to the twins. The preacher's wife invited Rachel to join the ladies' sewing circle. "People forget to judge when they're busy living their own lives," Sarah commented during one of her visits. "Besides, you and Thomas make it hard for anyone to think poorly of you, the way he looks at you." She smiled knowingly. "Well, it's clear to everyone this is a love match." In August, as her pregnancy progressed, Rachel received an unexpected letter. It was from her mother's sister, Aunt Catherine, who lived in Denver. She had only recently learned of Rachel's situation and wrote to reconnect, expressing regret for not knowing sooner of her niece's troubles. "She wants to visit," Rachel told Thomas that evening, "to meet you and the twins." Thomas looked pleased. "Family is important. We should invite her after the baby comes." Rachel hesitated. "I'm nervous. What if she judges us like Father did?" Thomas took her hand. "From her letter, she sounds nothing like your father. And even if she does disapprove, we have each other. That's all that matters." As autumn painted the prairie in russet and gold, Rachel's time drew near. Thomas hired a local girl, Emma, to help with the twins and household chores, ensuring Rachel could rest. On a blustery November morning, their second son entered the world after a mercifully short labor. They named him Samuel Thomas Cooper, and he was the image of his father with a shock of dark hair and serious eyes. "He's perfect," Thomas whispered, holding his son with practiced ease. "Just like his mama." Aunt Catherine arrived a week later, a tall, elegant woman whose kind eyes immediately put Rachel at ease. Unlike her stern brother, Catherine embraced Rachel warmly and fell instantly in love with her great niece and nephews. "Your mother would be so proud of the family you've made," she told Rachel as they sat together watching Thomas play with the twins in the yard, baby Samuel sleeping peacefully in his cradle. "Even though—" Rachel hesitated. "Even though what? That you found love and happiness after hardship." Catherine shook her head. "Marion had a generous heart. She would have adored these children and the man who loves you all so dearly." During her 2-week stay, Catherine proved herself a delightful addition to their household. She told the twins stories of their grandmother, helped Rachel with the baby, and even convinced Thomas to take Rachel for an afternoon ride while she watched the children. Before departing, she pressed an envelope into Rachel's hand. "A belated wedding gift," she explained, "and something to secure the children's future." After she left, Rachel opened the envelope to find a substantial bank draft and legal documents naming the Cooper children as beneficiaries of a trust Catherine had established. "She's given them a foundation," Rachel said in wonder. "Education opportunities." Thomas smiled, touched by the generosity. Family looking after family, that's how it should be. As their second Christmas approached, Thomas surprised Rachel with news that he had purchased the adjacent property, doubling the size of their ranch. "We're going to need more space," he explained, "for the children to grow and play, and maybe for more little ones someday." Rachel laughed, bouncing Samuel on her hip while the twins chased each other around the cabin. "Are 3 not enough for you, Mr. Cooper?" Thomas pulled her close, careful not to squish the baby between them. "I'd have a dozen with you, Mrs. Cooper, if you were willing." She leaned into his embrace, savoring his strength and warmth. "Let's see how we manage these 3 first," she teased. "Though I wouldn't be opposed to 1 or 2 more when Samuel is older." On Christmas Eve, as the children slept and snow fell gently outside, Thomas and Rachel sat before the fire, reflecting on the journey that had brought them together. "You know," Thomas said thoughtfully, "when I found you in my barn that night, I had no idea how completely you would change my life." Rachel smiled, her head resting on his shoulder. "I was so afraid. I couldn't imagine how we would survive. And now I can't imagine life without you." She looked up at him, love shining in her eyes. "You didn't just take us in, Thomas. You gave us a home, a family, a future." Thomas kissed her tenderly. "You gave me the same, Rachel. Before you, I was just existing. Now I'm truly living." Outside, the prairie winter wrapped around their snug cabin, but inside was warmth and love, and the precious gift of family, one forged not by blood alone, but by choice and commitment and hearts brave enough to trust. Spring arrived early the following year, bringing with it unexpected news. Harold Mason had suffered a stroke, and though he survived, he was much diminished. The bank had passed to new management, and Harold had been forced to retire to a smaller home under the care of a nurse. "Will you visit him?" Thomas asked when they heard. Rachel considered the question carefully. "Yes," she decided. "Not for his sake, but for mine, and for the children. Someday they'll ask about their grandfather." Thomas accompanied her for the difficult reunion. Harold, now confined to a wheelchair, seemed smaller somehow, his once imposing presence reduced by illness. He looked up in surprise when Rachel entered his parlor, the twins holding her hands and Thomas carrying Samuel. "Father," Rachel said quietly, "these are your grandchildren." Harold's eyes moved from the twins to the baby, then to Thomas, who stood protectively beside his family. Something shifted in the old man's gaze, not quite warmth, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. "They look healthy," he managed, his speech slurred from the stroke. "They are," Rachel replied. "They're thriving." The visit was brief and awkward, but as they prepared to leave, Harold reached out, catching Rachel's hand. "You did well," he said, the words clearly difficult for him. "Cooper's a good man." It wasn't an apology, but it was something, an acknowledgement, however small, that perhaps he had been wrong. "Yes," Rachel agreed, looking at Thomas with love. "The best of men." They visited Harold occasionally after that, never finding true warmth but establishing a tentative peace. When he died the following winter, he left a modest sum to each of his grandchildren, a final gesture that Rachel chose to see as reconciliation. Life on the Cooper ranch continued to flourish. Thomas's business expanded, with buyers seeking his expertly trained horses from territories as far as Wyoming and New Mexico. The original cabin was enlarged to a proper house with bedrooms for each child, and a spacious kitchen where Rachel experimented with recipes shared by neighbors and friends. In the summer of 1883, their family grew again with the birth of a daughter they named Marian Catherine, after Rachel's mother and aunt. She was a golden-haired beauty with her father's steady gaze and her mother's determined spirit. By then, the twins were 5, sturdy and confident, the best of playmates who nonetheless had distinct personalities. Lily was thoughtful and observant, already showing a talent for drawing that Thomas encouraged with supplies ordered from St. Louis. Liam was bold and adventurous, following his father everywhere and begging to help with the horses. Samuel, at 3, was quieter than his siblings but possessed a gentle way with animals that suggested he might follow in his father's footsteps someday. As the children grew, so did the community around them. Leavenworth expanded, bringing new families and opportunities. Thomas served on the school board while Rachel organized a lending library for the town's children. Their home became a gathering place for neighbors and friends, known for its warmth and hospitality. On the 10th anniversary of the night Rachel had sought shelter in Thomas's barn, they hosted a celebration not explaining the significance of the date to their guests, but sharing private smiles throughout the evening. After everyone had gone and the children were asleep, they sat on the porch swing, Thomas's arm around Rachel's shoulders as they gazed at the star-filled prairie sky. 10 years, Thomas mused. Sometimes it feels like yesterday I found you there with those tiny babies. Other times I can barely remember life before you. Rachel leaned into him, content. I was thinking today about how desperate I was that night, how I couldn't see any path forward. She turned to look at him, her expression soft in the moonlight. I never imagined ending up so blessed. Blessed, Thomas agreed, kissing her forehead. That's exactly what we are. Inside the house, their children slept peacefully, Lily and Liam in their rooms on either side of the hallway, Samuel in his bed cluttered with carved wooden animals, and little Marion in her crib with a quilt Rachel had stitched during her pregnancy. Each child secure in the knowledge they were cherished, each one a testament to the family Thomas and Rachel had built together. "I love you, Mrs. Cooper," Thomas whispered, his voice still holding the wonder of their first days together. "And I love you, Mr. Cooper," Rachel replied. "Today, tomorrow, always." Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, bearing witness to the miracle of their joined lives, a cowboy, a cast-out woman, and the children who had brought them together. Now a family bound by love stronger than blood, stronger than hardship, stronger than all the forces that had once threatened to keep them apart.